This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it is Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. This time around, I'm not going to be ranking cards based on their performance at Magic's highest level, like the majority of these MTG Top 10s do. Instead, this time, I'm going to look at the cards with the most reprints in the history of the game. Reprints are a big part of Magic, with most sets containing at least a few of them, and it got me to thinking, what cards have had the most incarnations in the history of the game? And, well, I decided to do the research to find that answer, and now I'm going to share it with you. One important caveat is that I didn't include basic lands on this list. Obviously enough, if I did, basic lands would be the cards that are reprinted the most, as they appear in almost every single set. Anyway, for each of these cards, we'll talk about why exactly Wizards has reprinted them so many times. Alright, let's get started on this list. At number 10, it's Stone Rain, which has been printed 24 times. It was originally printed in Alpha, the very first set of Magic ever. The fact it has been reprinted so many times might seem a bit strange today, because Wizards refuses to allow there to be a 3-mana land destruction spell in Standard, and as a result we haven't seen Stone Rain in forever. But for a long time, Stone Rain showed up at Common in a lot of sets, especially in core sets. It was a nice common to print because it is a quintessentially red card that does a good job of explaining what red is about to new players, and because it provided a safety net against any non-basic lands that might be too powerful in various formats. However, land destruction has proven to be one of the most unfun things about Magic, since it exacerbates being land screwed, and as a result, a card like Stone Rain hasn't actually been printed since 2008 in 9th edition. It is actually pretty impressive it made the list at all, but that goes to show you that this card was printed a ton from 1993 to 2008. I'm not sure any card has ever gone from auto-include in most sets to never going to print it again, and Stone Rain is a unique example of that. At number 9, I actually have 3 cards, since all 3 of them have been printed 25 times, and those are Terror, UNSUMMON, and SENGIR Vampire. Several slots on this list have multiple cards because, like in this case, the cards have the same number of reprints. All 3 of these cards made their debut way back in Alpha, something that goes a long way towards helping a card achieve a lot of reprints. Terror is a pretty powerful removal spell, capable of killing most stuff for only 2 mana at instant speed. Kind of like Stone Rain, Terror provides a great representation of what black is about at lower rarities. Something like Terror used to be considered a pretty reasonable card at Common. By today's standards, it would be super good, especially in Limited. Eventually, Wizards made a concerted effort to weaken spells and make the game more about creatures and less about those spells, and as a result, we don't usually see a card like Terror at the lower rarities anymore, and that's why it hasn't been printed since 2010. Wizards has wanted to avoid it. However, the other 2 cards with 25 reprints are still getting actively reprinted. UNSUMMON provides a solid common for Limited, and a card that usually sees some fringe play in Constructed. 1 blue mana to bounce something is a pretty nice deal. But at the same time, it isn't crazy powerful or anything, and as a result, it gets reprinted all the time, as recently as earlier this year. Lastly, SENGIR Vampire used to be Black's iconic creature, the powerful, highly efficient, and large creature that did a good job of representing black. But, while spells have gotten weaker over the years, creatures have gotten stronger, and the vampire today really isn't anything special. Wizards still likes to use it to introduce new players to the game, as it provides a cool, simple creature for new players. That's why it's still regularly included in welcome decks. At number 8, it's 2 cards, Giant Spider and Gravedigger, both of which have been printed 28 times. The Spider has been printed tons of times as a rather unimpressive common, but one that is usually necessary for green decks and Limited, since they don't have much in the way of flying. It's a simple card, and a great one for new players. That's why it has appeared predominantly in core sets. The Spider has been around since Alpha, and had its most recent printing in Core Set 2019. Gravedigger is the first card we've seen that hasn't been around since Alpha. Instead, it made its debut in Portal in 1997. Always a great card for Limited because of its 2-for-1 potential, the Digger, like a lot of heavily printed cards on this list, also has a very simple and clean design that does a good job of explaining that black really likes the graveyard. It was most recently printed earlier this year in Core Set 2020. At number 7, it is Pacifism with 29 reprints. A fairly iconic card for white thanks to all those printings, Pacifism is a fairly powerful removal spell for white and Limited, and often one of the best commons for the color in that format. It is a well-designed card because of its simplicity, but also because of the limitations it has. Sure, it can stop stuff from attacking or blocking, and that's pretty sweet, but it doesn't stop static or activated abilities, so it doesn't come across as too powerful of a removal spell at all. It's just right. That's what led to it being printed so many times. It gives white a premium common for limited, but doesn't make white too strong in either constructed or limited. It was just recently reprinted earlier this year. At number 6, there are 3 cards, Air Elemental, Swords to Plowshares, and Fireball, all of which have had 30 printings. After a brief detour away from cards that originated in Alpha, we now have a trio of cards that all appeared in Magic's very first set back in 1993. In its time, Air Elemental was a pretty nice creature, as a 5-mana 4/4 flyer was kind of rare. Meanwhile, Swords to Plowshares and Fireball are both very powerful cards that have had an impact on competitive Magic over the years. The Elemental is frequently reprinted as a good uncommon for blue in limited formats, with the most recent reprint coming in Core Set 2020. Swords to Plowshares can get rid of just about any creature for a single mana at instant speed, which is an incredibly powerful effect. Unlike most cards on this list, the number of reprints it has isn't the result of Core Set reprints and the like. This is because it is way too good for Standard, and that's been true for like 20 years. Instead, Swords has been reprinted a lot in supplemental products like Commander decks, Master sets, and Conspiracy. In fact, it hasn't been printed in a Standard legal set since 4th edition. Then there's Fireball, an iconic card from Magic's early days, thanks to the 2-card instant win combo of Channel and Fireball. Even in the absence of the combo, it provides a nice flexible spell that can remove multiple creatures, or just go for the opponent's face for lethal damage. It has an effect that is well designed because, while it is powerful in the right scenario, there are also times where it is less effective, like the early game. For a long time it was printed in core sets for that reason, but these days an effect like this is way too board altering to be printed at a lower rarity in a core set. The last time it was printed in one of those was 2012. However, it does receive reprints elsewhere, like in Iconic Masters. At number 5, it is both Shivan Dragon and Terramorphic Expanse, both of which have 31 reprints. Shivan Dragon is a card that has been around as long as Magic has, and in the early days of Magic, it was really Red's most iconic creature, and it was played at Magic's highest levels. But like we've seen with some other creatures on this list, like SENGIR Vampire, over time, the dragon has become less impressive, but it is a good card for introducing new players to the game since it gives you a big, cool creature that does a good job of representing Red. As a result, it gets reprinted all the time, in core sets and welcome decks mostly. Terramorphic Expanse is a much more recent card, first making its debut in 2006 in Time Spiral. The Expanse is a nice source of fixing at the common rarity, and it is something that Wizards seems interested in having in most formats, well, either it or Evolving Wilds, which is functionally identical. They provide some nice fixing in Limited. While it has been printed in several standard legal sets, it is also printed almost every time a new Commander set comes out, as it provides those decks with a nice source of fixing. It seems likely that both of these cards are going to just keep getting reprinted. At number 4, we have 3 cards, Dark Ritual, Disenchant, and Counterspell, which have all been reprinted 33 times. All 3 of these cards were printed for the first time in Alpha, and obviously have been reprinted a ton over the years. Unlike the vast majority of cards on this list too, all 3 of these have seen a considerable amount of play in Constructed over the years. Dark Ritual provides you with some extra mana, something that can allow for some pretty crazy starts. For a long time, this was one of Black's most quintessential cards, but eventually, a Dark Ritual type effect like this one was deemed a bit too good, and most effects like it were also moved to Red's slice of the color pie. While it was recently reprinted in Masters 25, it has been quite a while since Dark Ritual was legal in a standard legal set. For that, you have to go all the way back to Mercadian Masks. So, while it has been reprinted a ton, it isn't happening a whole lot these days. Disenchant, meanwhile, provides a nice efficient effect that is always good to have around in Standard, since it hates on 2 card types that can sometimes be difficult to deal with. As a result, like Dark Ritual, it has seen play in constructed formats. Of these 3, Counterspell has been the most successful competitively. Countering spells is something that is very blue, and as a result, blue usually has a few decent counterspells in most standard formats, and for a long time, that counterspell was, well, Counterspell. However, just like we discussed with Terror about a decade ago, Wizards decided to start powering down spells and powering up creatures, and as a result, they stopped printing 2-mana counters like Counterspell, with most of the good standard legal ones these days coming in at 3 mana or asking you to jump through some hoops to get it to 2 mana. As a result, like Dark Ritual, Counterspell has not been reprinted in a standard legal set in a very long time, not since 7th edition. However, because of its iconic status, it is reprinted a lot in supplemental products, and that has allowed it to still appear pretty high on this list. At number 3, I have 2 cards, LLANOWAR and Evolving Wilds, each of which have been printed 34 times. LLANOWAR Elves, like a lot of cards on this list, is as old as Magic is. It is also one of the best mana dorks ever printed, and as a result has been played a lot over the years. For a long time, Wizards seemed to really like having the Elves in Standard. It provided green with one of its key advantages over the other colors, mana acceleration. For a little while there, though, Wizards wanted to move away from 1-mana mana dorks in Standard because they wanted Standard to be a bit slower. However, the Elves were reprinted in Dominaria for the first time in a while, and in Core Set 2020, and they didn't mess the format up or anything, so there may be a chance for the Elves to continue to appear in future Standard legal sets. Evolving Wilds is functionally identical to Terramorphic EXPANSE, so we don't need to go into too much depth there. Worth noting, though, that if we combined EXPANSE and Evolving Wilds printings, it would give us 65 reprints, which would easily be number 1. And number 2, it's SERRA Angel, which has been printed 38 times. As we've gone through this list, we've seen both SENGIR Vampire and Shivan Dragon, respectively Black and Red's early iconic creatures that were some of the best creatures in Magic's earliest decks. Well, SERRA Angel was White's iconic creature from those early days, and was considered by most the best creature in the entire game, at least back in 1993. Vigilance and flying on a 4/4 body for only 5 mana was an incredible deal, and it was played a lot even in Magic's early competitive days from 1994 to 1996. Like the Vampire and Dragon, SERRA Angel has looked less impressive over the years as creatures have become increasingly powerful, but Wizards still likes printing this card every chance they get, just because it is such an important one from Magic's history, and it's a great one to introduce players to the game. So like the Vampire and Dragon, the Angel is printed a lot in core sets and in welcome decks. And at number 1, it's Giant Growth, which has been printed 44 times, putting it a full 6 reprints ahead of SERRA Angel. This is yet another card on the list that is as old as the game is, making its debut back in Alpha. Obviously, it's been reprinted a lot over the years, sort of like how Dark Ritual and Counterspell came to be very representative spells for their respective colors. Giant Growth was really representative of green in its flavor. It tells you right away that green is great at making creatures huge. Unlike the Ritual and Counterspell, which were eventually deemed as too good for standard formats, Giant Growth has hung around for a long time, since it isn't nearly as dangerous to print as those two cards. After all, it's just a combat trick. Alright, that does it for this MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future episodes of MTG Top 10, don't forget to subscribe, and if you want to see the over 220 other MTG Top 10s I've already done, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.